Well, welcome and thank you for attending. I think I am in the dead zone after lunch, after afternoon tea, so hopefully this will be riveting enough to keep you in your seats. But if it's not, please let me know. So, I am by trade a teacher. I love to teach. Teaching is just an absolute joy for me. So today I'm going to be talking about the experience of schooling, what schooling looks like in Australia and New South Wales, and particularly looking at the school that I run at the moment, which is Giant Steps at Sydney. So I'll show you where it is. So if you can see this little blue circle down here, Giant Steps is situated there. So Sydney sits up there and we are down the Parramatta River. Now it's a really interesting historical fact that we were settled by the British in the 1770s. And the very first things that they built were prisons and courthouses because Australia was a prison island. They sent all of their prisoners to Australia. So we've got this very sort of mischievous nature and can do lots of things. So we are sitting in the grounds of the very first prison and the very first psychiatric unit that was ever established in Australia. And of course there is a very long and painful history in those buildings, particularly for people with autism and people with other disabilities. Thankfully now it's changed and we've converted the spaces, these beautiful sandstone spaces, into a beautiful school. But it is about imagining and including and innovating so that our children are happy, engaged young people, and that's what we're about at school. Oh, thank you. Which one, this one? Okay, let's start with the really boring stuff, and this is what we run. So we have two schools. We run an adult program for young people with very, very complex needs in that sort of 18 through to, I think our oldest young adult is around about 40. In school, we have around 111 students across both Sydney and Melbourne, Sydney being the biggest school. And so as I'm the principal of Sydney, as well as being the National Director of all schools and colleges, most of what I'm going to be talking about will be Sydney-based. We run lots of sibling programs because siblings are so important. And they're so important because it gives us information about what is going on for students as well. The siblings are a great source of knowledge in terms of advocating for their brother or sister and letting us know what are really, really, really important things. We have a diagnostic and assessment centre. We run a mental health clinic. So in our we run a mental health clinic, so we have a psychiatrist and a paediatrician who work together along with a neurologist, and they come to school. We run the clinic at school. The paediatrician, the psychologist and the neurologist all visit the children where they're most comfortable, and that's in the classrooms and in school. And then we get to sort of talk and unpack difficulties, and perhaps there might be some medication issues that we might work alongside that group with. We run early intervention, we run lots of parent training programs, and the majority of our young people transition from our school, which is a special school just for children with autism, into a mainstream school. So that's all of the things that we run. So this talk was about student need, and I could give you a list a mile long about what students need. But what we did a good few years ago when this school was in its infancy, it's been running for 22 years now, is that we changed that question and we actually asked the students. And we asked the students, we asked the siblings, we asked our alumni, so our ex-students who had moved on to mainstream school, we asked them all, what is it that you need in a school? What do you need us to do? And that was a really interesting thing to do. So instead of us deciding what students need, the students would decide what it is that they wanted from us. And so what came back out of that was that students were particularly interested in doing the same thing that all of the other children of their age were actually doing. They wanted to come to school and have fun. They wanted to come to school to have the freedom to move about and to enjoy and to be themselves. And they were really important sort of foundational thoughts about what we needed to do as we moved forward as a school and changed from the old model that we were running. So the old model that we were running was from Giant Steps at Montreal, where we used to do things like children would go for an hour in speech therapy, an hour in occupational therapy, an hour doing academic work, and an hour doing something else that I can't remember. And so we changed that, or we blew that up based on what students were telling us about what they actually wanted a school to be, because they were the consumers. And so it was a really good thing to do to ask them what we needed to do. So the program that we run, we're a school and we're registered as a school, so we run the Australian curriculum, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We run a transdisciplinary approach, which means that, for example, we have 17 classes at school, we have 19 teachers, we also have 17 therapists, so we have 5 speech therapists, I think we have about 7 occupational therapists, and we have 5+ music therapists at the moment. So a transdisciplinary approach means that all of those professionals work together in the classroom with the children all the time. So we don't pull children out, work with them over here and expect them to jump back into the classroom and take those skills and put them into practice, because that's a really, really hard thing for children to do. So instead, this transdisciplinary approach means that teachers learn how to take on speech therapy and put it across the 6 hours of the day. Occupational therapists learn from speech therapists, and so we get a much, much richer set of professionals who are more competent in the classroom than we would if we were simply working alone. So there's a lot of collaboration in that particular piece of the program. Our staff ratio is 1:1+. I think at the moment we have 85 students and we probably have around 94 to 95 full-time staff working with the students. So we've got a lot of staff that are working with the students, but we are not 1:1. We have enough staff to be able to support students if they're having a meltdown or a moment, if we need to go out and prepare something else, if we need to adjust and be flexible during that lesson to support that children to remain engaged. But we're not 1:1, because as soon as we attach a child and a staff member, this staff member is employed to help this child, so they tend to invent all sorts of things and then become quite a what they tend to do is not allow that child to actually step forward, initiate and become independent. So I'm very cautious about 1:1, side by side with a child all of the time. I think it's really important that everybody is able to deliver the program to the child in a seamless way and not just attaching it to one person, which means that we can be really flexible in terms of where everybody works within the school. 50% of staff are professional staff, so teachers, therapists, psychologists. It is collaborative decision making, so we're making lots of decisions behind the scenes, but when it comes to working with the children, that child can't determine whether you're a speech therapist, a teacher, a teacher's aide, or a psychologist, because we're all delivering in the same way to that particular child. The common strategies across everything that we do, we're looking at all of those things that are individual to each child. So what motivates them? What are their sensory considerations? The environmental management, how does that environment actually help that child? Routines and rhythms, communication, and the adult interaction style. And you'll see some of that adult interaction style in this next little video that I'm going to show you. And I think that the program probably picks up more of those elements of CERTS, the CERTS program by Barry Prizant, than it possibly does anything else. CERTS standing for social communication, emotional regulation, and transactional supports. So that kind of is the program, but let's just have a look at what actually happens in the program. So, can I just go back for a moment? So, the Sydney Opera House, everybody recognises it. It's an iconic Australian building. There's no better image of Australia. And Light Up Blue, World Autism Day, we're always lighting up the sails. But this is a little piece around a collaboration that we did with the Sydney Opera House. I will let the video speak for itself. So can we play that?
Your Opera House has been doing autism-friendly performances for a couple of years now, and today's been a fantastic collaboration with Opera Australia and Giant Steps. A lot of work has had to go into preparing the students.
So it was a long process in working through the logistical implications. We had a lot of sensory considerations, so we worked with headphones and chewies and fidget toys.
We had a Meet Your Seat excursion.
We had the performers come to Giant Steps.
The school and the teachers rehearsed the songs and they knew the music and what to expect.
We also had chill out spaces.
You know, we had the right front of house staff, we had volunteers.
We have all learned an incredible amount.
The relationship with Giant Steps enabled us to understand all of the different elements that go into making an autism-friendly performance.
We know that Evie loves music and she loves performance, and it reaches into her and creates a common bond of communication.
I think that what we're doing is quite groundbreaking.
It's only by doing pilots that everyone around, from the company to the venue, can see that it works, see what people get out of it, how worthwhile it is.
We can show through these events like this one today that things are possible, and we can, with little resources, but by partnering, make things happen.
The Opera House is the most iconic building, and Opera Australia is the flagship opera company, so to have children with autism to be able to come like anyone else is really important.
The fact that a little girl who loves ballet can go to the ballet. A little girl who loves seeing a show can see a show with beautiful songs and colour and movement, and that tells a story, a fundamentally human story. I mean, that means a lot.
So that was the Sydney Opera House, and we have collaborated with them probably for the past 10 years, and we've worked with the Opera House so that performance and the environment around the Opera House is accessible for young people with autism and adults with autism. And it's been a really important program for family as well, because it is so important for family to be able to take their young person out to a football match, to a performance, to a family dinner. And so this had loads of elements about coping with big spaces, coping with noise, how are we going to tolerate that, how are we going to engage with that program. Some of our children jumped into that program very, very quickly, but for one of the little boys that you'll see later on, it took him about 4 years before he would actually go into the theatre because he was just so overwhelmed by the space. But you can do that with lots of series of successive approximations towards having that opportunity without putting them in a very stressful situation. So it's perfectly okay for him to say, no, I don't want to go in there, and staff will sit down and work with him outside of that. You can see the interaction style that is happening there with staff. So staff are very engaged with the children. There's a lot of social engagement. We are continually developing rapport with the children so that they see us as a real partner in the work that we're doing, and that they know that they can trust us and that we're going to support them in any way that they need support in order to be able to attain their goals. So it's just a really nice piece of video looking at that. And what has been really important in this particular process is that parent expectation has risen enormously, because we've now been able to demonstrate that children can go to a performance of The King and I, which was a very big performance. It went for an hour and a half, but they did it absolutely beautifully, and the kids all thoroughly enjoyed it, to the point where one of our children, William, and this is in 2012, so quite some time ago. William is a young boy at school, and of course it's called the Opera House, and he really didn't figure out why the Opera House didn't have any windows or doors. So he redrew the Opera House with windows and doors, because that's what houses have. And he presented that to the CEO of the Opera House, and is actually sitting in the foyer with that idea that it is a house, and so it should be accessible for everyone. So there are so many far-reaching effects in that regard. And it's just a beautiful piece of artwork, isn't it? It's just clever. I love it. It's a joy. So when we're working with children in the school, we tend to take a much, much bigger picture of the child. So certainly we're looking at personality, and doesn't everybody have one, but oftentimes that's forgotten as we're focusing on this deficit model of autism the whole time. Yet our children are as stubborn and likeable. All of those things around personality certainly sit there, and we have to understand that. We certainly take care of that autism piece, and we're looking at theory of mind, executive functioning, social comm, repetitive behaviours, we've got all that as well. We're looking at some of those medical issues and sorting those out because they will often come up for our young people. Their mental health and their well-being is a big part, particularly as our young people work towards adolescence and into early adulthood. Engagement support, what motivates them? It's just the key piece. What is motivating? How do we stay emotionally regulated and so available for learning? Looking at our competency and looking at having really positive experiences across the day, and then learning, comprehension, processing, speed, attention, all of those things that lots and lots of presenters have talked about before. So here we are, this little person in the middle with all of this. And it is a real challenge for a school, because as a school, we need to figure out how we're going to work with all of the children in our school, not just one child, or not just those 5 children that might be in our class. We need to have an overview that takes that child over time, because those children may be here with us for 5 or 10 years, maybe longer, maybe less. But we need to be able to understand that young person. So at Giant Steps, we do something called In My Own Words. And In My Own Words is that we write a profile around the child from the perspective of the child. So it's written in the first person so that everybody understands that child, everybody has that shared understanding, so we're not getting lots and lots of different opinion coming in about a child or a different interpretation of what's going on. It becomes a really live document, and it is reviewed pretty much weekly, and we make adjustments as that child is demonstrating some increased learning, or maybe there's some emotional regulation or a particular strategy that it's coming into play. So this is the young girl that I have been working with all year. I am not a principal who sits behind a desk. I'm actually a principal who, for most of the day, is actually working in class or working with children. So this little girl, Marie, enrolled in our school only partway through this year. She'd come from a regular school where she had been excluded and only sat in the playground for about 2 hours every day. She actually didn't make it into a classroom. She didn't attend full time, and people thought that she was so difficult that they really wanted to exit her out of the school. And because we're a school for children with autism, we need to be able to take students and we need to be able to work with and problem solve the issues of Marie. So this is the beginning of Marie's profile. We're beginning to understand Marie, and we want to share Marie with everybody. So here's Marie, and we've got a whole range of things that are on the Autism Hub around how to write a profile. So my loves. So here is Marie. She loves reenacting favourite scenes from favourite TV shows such as Pokemon and Blue Clues. And you might hear me using phrases from these shows all the time. I love to crash down on the trampoline or the mat. So you'll see Marie walking along and suddenly she's down like a big sack of potatoes, laughing away. I love imaginary play in the OT room. I love soft toys. I love maps, especially if you draw me a map of where we're going and what we'll be doing. I love water, but I don't have the swim skills yet. But I will wade in the water and participate in water-based activities. So we're getting a sense of this young girl, and we're able, and staff, even if they're not working with her, are able to pick up the profile, they're able to read it, they're able to understand it, and it also has applicability outside of school, and parents have also added to this. So it becomes a piece, particularly for those young people who are not verbal, to explain what it is about themselves so people have an understanding without having to discover all the time. But it's hard to stop myself. So for Marie, it's hard to stop myself swearing. So what it is best to do for adults is to just ignore that a little bit. Not respond, just let it go. Now, if we didn't have that, we'd have some people responding, some people not responding, some people saying, no, that's a good thing, some people saying it's a bad thing. So it's much easier if we let staff know what that response is going to be so that Marie develops a trust and confidence and understanding about what that interaction is going to look like. So when I'm swearing, give me some space. And at another point throughout my day, provide me with some alternative phrases to use, such as, oh, rats, or, oh, never mind. So we're trying to do something that is alternative. Asking questions. Provide me with verbal and visual responses. Please respond once and a maximum of twice, as I often perseverate on the topic, which can make me upset. So she starts to wind up and repeat and repeat and repeat and get herself into a very emotionally dysregulated state. What we should have there is that we would also provide some visual support so that she can hold on to them and just refer to them again. Prompt me to find the answer myself. I think you know the answer. Can you remember when mum's coming? And give me concrete information as much as possible. That being in the form of visual supports. Well, absolutely visual supports. Spitting. And she can do this with great grace and hits her mark every time. So give me space and provide me with alternatives about where you can actually spit and that that's okay at that given time. Insisting you repeat my phrases, give me space and time, and that perseveration often makes her very, very upset and she gets into a very difficult position. So again, we will just give her that phrase, give her time and space to allow herself to settle down a little bit. Expressing my emotions. When I'm happy, I'll laugh and fall to the ground and roll backwards. But please note that sometimes if you try to share my happiness and laugh and smile with me, I may become very upset and begin to yell and cry. So we don't want that to happen. So it's really important for staff to be able to step back away from that and respond accordingly. When I'm upset, I'll cry, move to the ground, kick, hit, spit, scratch, and attempt to bite others. When I become upset, please make sure that I'm in a safe space and others around me are safe. I'll often request to look at an emotions chart, however, this often makes me more upset. I will talk about angry, frustrated, sad, and scared. However, I'm often getting these mixed up. So they're not making a lot of sense at this time when Marie's emotional dysregulation is getting higher. I also find it difficult to deal with my emotions, and it can take me a long time to calm down if I've been upset. And there's another page about what that looks like. What are the soothing words you're going to use, where you're going to sit, what might be the next activity that you would present to Marie, so that everybody gets an idea of how to do it consistently so that Marie builds up a level of trust and confidence in us so that we can get her to the point of coming into a classroom and engaging in the learning. Marie is delightful. Recently, she loves Officeworks, she loves stationery, and so we had planned a trip to Officeworks, which is a big stationery supplier. And we'd done lots of forewarning. I'd been to Officeworks, we'd taken a video model, so I had walked through Officeworks looking like a silly person really, taking lots of video of maps and pens and pencils and all of the like. And so we'd done lots of work about this is what we're going to do, Kerrie's going to come, we're going to drive in the Kia. When we get to Officeworks, this is the door that you're going to go through, this is the route, we've got a map and everything is all right. So we tried this and there was great excitement about it. Marie got to Officeworks, I parked the car, Marie got out and she dropped on the ground and that was it. She was telling me really quite clearly that we were not going to Officeworks, which for me was a great disappointment. But we needed to absolutely respond to Marie saying no. And when I got in the car, I said, oh, Marie, what happened? She went, oh, that was a fail, Kerrie. Maybe next time it will be better. So it was just gorgeous that she could let us know that she just wasn't quite ready for that and that we will try again later. We did try again later, and we did go and buy maps and stationery and all of those sorts of things as well. So the idea of creating a profile is a really important part to maintain that sense of that young person without it being changed every time staff change or classroom teachers change. The The profile is based on a whole range of assessments as well. It's quite a big piece. It has lots of pictures. It has some video in it. And you can find it all on the Autism Hub, the actual template for that. So please feel free to use it. But it's a great description of our young people and what happens over time. So people can go back and read what that looked like in terms of that development piece from little ones when they were 5 through to 15. Doing the same work as everyone else, absolutely critically important. And so we do all of the things of the Australian curriculum. We do maths, English, history, geography, PDHP, which is personal development, health and fitness, science and technology, and all of the rest of it. So we write units of work, and we write units of work that are exciting and that allow those children to explore and see the world. So, for example, in music, I think we're doing, I can't actually read it, we're doing African drums, we're doing rock and roll, those sorts of really exciting, content-driven units of work so that the children can engage in those. But underneath all of those, we actually write down and we have a whole set of outcomes that we deliver. So it doesn't really matter if you're doing African drums or Elvis Presley, or you're doing science using transport, for example, or maths or whatever. The outcomes still remain the same so that we can track children over time, and we can track them over around about sort of 10 years using all of the different learning goals that we have under each outcome. So this unit of work is around about transport, it's around mathematical concepts, and this unit of work was across the school, so it went from age 5 through to year 18, so students aged 18. So some students worked on things like washing cars and understanding how to go to the petrol station, put in petrol, understanding money, understanding how to do tyre pressure. Other children actually worked on some initial coding, and they were doing coding for little racing cars that were racing around bike tracks. Other young people were looking at categorising transport and going out and actually counting transport on an overhead where there's a big overhead bridge, and they were looking at counting, categorising, classifying, thinking about how people drove. They were looking at all sorts of transport. So that allowed a really rich content point. And what I see in lots of schools that I visit with autism is that there's not really a very strong curriculum. There is not curriculum that is talking about science experiments and what is a volcano and all of those sorts of things. It tends to be about all of those skill levels, and so they've got lots of, learn to do things, but not a lot about learning about things. And we're really interested in this kind of learn about, so that it develops those interest points and those motivations. Levels of engagement. So we're really looking at, and we take engagement data on every student, every day, every half hour or every session that we're running. So we're wanting to look at how engaged students are in our lesson. So they're giving us information now and telling us to adjust our practice because it's just not good enough if I am not engaged, if I'm not up that end of 4, 5 or 6, then our program, our teaching program has missed its mark. So we really need to think about how do we make sure that students are actually engaging with us. So down here, where students are actively disengaged, they may well be running out the room, lying on the floor, have gone to sleep because it's just as boring as. So a disengaged child doesn't share a common focus of attention, is inattentive or not watching, and we're really working towards that independent engagement. So where that child is actually engaged in the process, is engaged in the doing, is looking at all of their belongings, how they're going to come to Q&A or question and answer within the context of that lesson. So we take engagement data across the day and we track engagement data, and that gives us feedback about whether that child is actually enjoying their day and engaged in the lesson, and if they're not, we must change that. We also run through a whole range of engagement supports. In Tier 1, we have a tiered system, 1, 2 and 3, where we're looking at things about why that child is not engaged as well. So making sure that all of the autism strategies are there, ready for that child, so that they are as well prepared and as solidly based as possible in order to engage in the learning. The other thing that we do And two things, looking at engagement and looking at dysregulation. So this is when children are having meltdowns or having some really difficult moments. And again, what we're doing here is looking at episodic severity for students. And I'll just show you one example of that. So this is a child, and we have levelled their behaviour. So we've looked and observed all that is happening for that child. And you can see that the child up here is biting and scratching, and down here at 1, they're giving us some ideas that they're not well emotionally regulated. And children don't learn unless they're very well emotionally regulated. So we must think about what we're going to do in that aspect. So we take data, again, either 30 minutes or 15 minutes, on what they're doing in terms of episodic severity and what they're doing in terms of engagement. And we're hoping that we're bringing episodic severity down whilst we're increasing engagement in curriculum. Oh, I've got the thing. So just one case study. This is a 16-year-old. She's a lovely girl. In 2013, several hospitalisations from parents because of her self-injurious behaviour where they just couldn't cope. As a result, she came on some medications to lower her anxiety. In 2014 and 15, she generally had a calm year and was very well engaged in the program. We had this re-emergence of really difficult behaviours in 2015 and 16 with really high distress. And that was because the family moved, there was a family breakup, all sorts of things were happening outside of the school program. And we took data. And so the red is a child who is highly dysregulated, and you can see this young girl is having a really difficult time, as are the staff. So we really had to begin to think about how we were going to support this child's emotional regulation. And as you can see, it was starting to dip down into more yellow, which is about halfway through. By 2017, we're into the green, and she is back with us and engaged in the program and really enjoying herself again. The key elements of that were that we didn't go in terms of supporting this young person. She left us at this point and went to a completely other state and did very well and was able to move on. What we did was to broaden her activities. So instead of getting very, very narrow and only working on the levels of distress, what we did was broadened it out so that she was in community the whole time. She was out bushwalking, she was rock climbing, she was swimming, she was doing all those favoured activities in order to help her deal with those stresses, in order to redevelop a relationship. And then we did a lot of work in order to improve the consistency of her approach, again using that profile across school, the new accommodation that she was in, and her post-school environments. So data is terribly important. It is the evidence base that we use in order to understand where children are at. I will leave you with one thing because it's just 30 minutes. Liam is a young boy who transitioned from us when he was about 6 years of age. He has since won the National Science Prize in Australia and has done extremely well. He wrote a little book when he was 7 years old, and he since continues to write me some more pieces. He wrote the complete works of Shakespeare in autism-friendly speak so that people with ASD could understand it, and it's a beautiful piece of writing. But he wrote this when he was a young fellow, and he said, "And in case you're wondering there is no cure, I said it's not a disease. Well, let me rephrase that a little. ASD is like, well, it's a little hard to define. It affects how you behave, how you live, what you like, even how you interact with other people. So let's just say it's an incurable personality disease." That's not bad. Sure, it can mean I can't speak, but that's not the case with me. In fact, when I was at Play Steps session, I think I was about 4 or something like that, I said to my mother, "I love you." And that's not something you'd expect from someone like me. So he is a lovely boy, and he's one of our alumni who come back and actually help us understand what is going to be good practice within a school. So look, I thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm sorry that I went over 30 minutes. My apologies there.